Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Resume Lab. My name is Dorothy Baumgartner, and I'm with the Career and Professional Development team here at WGU. I'm so glad you are able to join me today. We've got lots of great information about some resume fundamentals and best practices to help you build your resume. So I have a couple of things I want to just go over quickly as some housekeeping. One, you will receive a copy of the recording of this lab, of this workshop. And so do please feel free to take care of yourself. You know, everybody has different learning styles and stuff going on in your life. So if you need to get up and step away and stretch, don't worry, you will get the content later. If you have questions, feel free to put them into the chat. We have a pretty big registration list today, so I'm not sure I'll be able to get to all of them. I'll do my best. But so I do want you to make note of this email, careers@wgu.edu. That's our team email. So if you don't get your question answered today, or you think of something later, or you have a question about a different career topic, you're welcome to use that email to send to our team, and we'll be happy to help you. So please do take a note of that, and let's jump in and take a look at the roadmap for what we're going to cover today. So first, we're going to spend some time talking about what happens to your resume and your application when you apply for a job. And typically it's uploaded into an applicant tracking system. It's important to understand what they're, how they work, because that has a direct implication about how you want to format and write your resume. We'll take some time and do a resume walkthrough, looking at different parts of a resume, talking about best practices and some tips for things that you should be sure that you include and some things that you should not do. So we'll have some resume do's and don'ts kind of as a summary of that. And then we're going to spend just a few minutes looking at a job description to try to identify how do you pick out some of the things that you need to highlight on your resume. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end for Q&A for questions. And I will say again, I will generally probably try to address questions that are most applicable to a larger group of people. If you have specific questions about your own resume, it may be best to send those questions in by email. All right, I'm going to jump in and let's talk about those applicant tracking systems. So this is a very common tool that most companies are using, like 90% or more of companies and businesses are using some electronic AI form of managing applications during the hiring process. And so the first thing that happens when you apply, unless you're, for example, sending a resume to somebody's email, if you're going through a browser, you're uploading it online, it's going to be going through an applicant tracking system. We call them ATSs. So you'll hear ATS commonly when we're talking about resumes. They help a company manage the entire applicant process, but it's the initial thing that happens. It's kind of the first scan of your application materials. And what happens is applicant tracking systems have an algorithm that's scanning for keywords that match their position description. And they'll assign your resume a match rate. That match rate, that score, is what determines whether or not your resume is going to move forward onto a human being, to a recruiter or a hiring manager. So it's really important. It's the concept that you need to get to is that your resume is not a static document. I really recommend that you develop a master resume for the role, the type of role that you're interested in going for. And one way you can do that is pull 3 or 4 or 5 position descriptions for actual jobs of the kind of job you want. Go through the process of identifying those keywords, the patterns across them, for what's most commonly required, what are the most common responsibilities, and make sure you develop your resume around that that pattern analysis that you just did across various job postings. And once you've developed that master resume for the type of role that you're applying for, that's what you use then when you find a job that you want to apply for. You need to plan to take the time to work on customizing your resume for that particular job. We'll talk about that some more when we look, a little farther in the presentation. But essentially what you want to be doing is mirroring the language of that specific job description every time you apply for a job, so you increase that match rate or that score, increasing your chances of moving your resume on. There are several things that are important about that, and I will show you some tools that can help you with that customization in a little bit. But I do want to talk first, aside from the matching keyword issue, the other thing that's really important to know about applicant tracking systems are formatting issues. So there's two key things about applicant tracking systems you need to know about is formatting and then that keyword algorithm. The formatting issue is that they are notoriously bad, many of them, at reading aesthetic formatting features. So this might feel a little conflicting to, the things that you see out there, all those beautiful templates that say, try to grab your attention and say, make your resume stand out from the crowd. And there are these really beautifully designed resume templates out there. However, many applicant tracking systems cannot read them. They can't read color, columns, tables, text boxes, borders, icons, things in the header and the footer of the document. And so you want to stay away from all of those kinds of things. I've seen a screenshot from an Amazon recruiter that had a person whose name was in color and the applicant tracking system couldn't read it. So even if the person was qualified, they didn't know who they were or how to contact them. So you want to stay away from those, stick with plain black and white. You'll notice up here, this comment PDF templates are also sometimes some applicant tracking systems have trouble with them. So we recommend that unless a posting specifically says that they accept a PDF, that you stick with a plainly formatted Microsoft Word document. And we've got lots of templates on our website. You can choose any of those, download them if you would like to do that. So I have a question in the chat. Are you talking about bullet points, lines, etc.? The bullet points in Microsoft Word, the automatic bullet point that you format with is okay in an applicant tracking system. If you change that to a different symbol, like an arrow, that kind of thing, that can be problematic. So just stick with that plain formatting. But the other thing is that you also want to have a nice visual hierarchy and a professional, crisp looking resume, because after you get through the applicant tracking system, a human being is going to be reading it. And the statistics that we have on the research that's done about that is that recruiters will spend on average 6 to 7 seconds skimming your resume before they decide whether or not to keep reading. So you want to make sure that it's really easy for them to find the information that they're looking for. And I've got some points about that when we do the resume walkthrough. So again, you want to stay away from all of those beautiful templates. You can use those for your hard copy. If you're invited in for an interview, you may want to have one formatted like that you can, so you have hard copies to hand out to an interviewing team, for example. But you may get hung up in an applicant tracking system. Now, I will say, I've worked with many students and alumni who've said, I've been looking for a job for X number of months. And I've gotten a few responses, but not very much. And they seem to be pretty well qualified. Well, then we take a look at their resume and they've got color and columns and borders and tables. So it can be a little bit deceptive because you might get a few responses, and that's because there are some applicant tracking systems that are sophisticated enough to read them, but many of them are not. So best practice is to stick with lowest common denominator in terms of formatting to make sure you're getting through that machine and getting to a human being. All right, let's see. The other thing is about that, if you have a lot of extra things on your resume, that's one of the things that can happen with that aesthetic formatting. If it comes across as busy or loud or really dense, recruiters just may not read it. Just imagine what they're doing. They're sitting and reading through hundreds of resumes typically in a week. So anything that just looks like it's going to be hard to get the information, that's just going to go on the reject pile. All right, so it's all about making it easy for your information to stand out. We're going to take a few minutes now and actually walk through this resume. Here's an example. This is not, I'm not saying that you have to follow exactly this format. We do have a number of different layout types of things on our website, so you may want to take a look at this, but this is just for an example to walk through so we can hit all points of this. I'm just going to start with font. It should be the same size and font all the way through your resume except for your name. So you want your name to be in something like 16 to 20 point, and you typically want your font to be in 10 to 12 point. You want it to be an easy to read font, no funky things, and not a bunch of different ones, because that makes it really hard on the eye. That makes it harder for that recruiter to skim it. So you're wasting some of your precious 7 seconds. So clean and easy to skim. You want all of your section, oops, excuse me, I clicked on that, didn't mean to do that. You want all of your section headings to be formatted similarly, so it's really easy to see when it's a different section. And the other thing is your font. We used to recommend Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman. I'm seeing more and more and more recommendations that you stick with a sans serif font. Serif font are the ones that have the little curly cues like Times New Roman does. So one that is very clean like this is easier to skim. Okay, so let's look at these sections. A professional summary is optional. I see, lots of resumes that have these and lots of them then that don't. It depends on your level of experience and the kind of role you're going for, and to some degree your industry. The summary is probably the thing that you are going to revise the most, customize the most when you're applying for different positions, because what you want to be pulling into the summary are your highlights, qualifications for that particular role. This is the first thing a recruiter is going to read. So you want to grab their attention and make sure they keep going past those first 7 seconds. So this is something that's, as it says, you can do this in bullet point format, or you can do it in narrative paragraph form, but it is a summary of your experience and qualifications relative to that specific job description. All right. Next, we're going to look at experience, your professional experience. You may want to title this something related to your industry. So you see here, for example, professional marketing experience. You may want to have that listed if you were going for a marketing role. Or relevant professional experience is another way that you can so the best practice is that you always should put your professional experiences in reverse chronological order, meaning that your current or most recent is at the top and then you go backwards. However, let's take this marketing experience as an example. Let's say you had a marketing role 7 years ago for about 5 years, and it really demonstrates your qualifications, and then you did something really different, during the pandemic or whatever. And you decided to take it off or work from home, or you were a barista or something that was unrelated to marketing. You would typically put that current or most recent experience first. However, it doesn't relate to the role. So one way that you can manage that is to title this section relevant professional experience, list that marketing and any other previous marketing experience, and then you can have an additional, I'm going to pop to the next slide quickly so you can see what I'm talking about. You can have an additional experience section for things that are not necessarily related to this particular type of role, but you want to have it included to demonstrate work history. So that's one way you can handle something like that, where you're currently working in something that's not necessarily related to your role. The way you want to be formatting your positions is the job title should be first and in bold. I see a lot of people start with a company name. Generally, recruiters are going to be much more interested in the role you held than necessarily where you did it. So you want that to pop out. What was your job title? If there was a division, for example, you might include that there. And then the employer name, city, and state. And then you want all your dates on the right margin of the document. That's a place where recruiters are used to skimming. Again, you want to make it easy for them to find your info. If you have your date over here on the left, buried underneath your job title, they got to take some of that time. They like to skim down the dates to just get a quick overview of your experience. A lot of times you can put the employer name, city, state after the job title and have it on one line. That can help you save some lines and some space on your resume, because one of the current best practices is to keep your resume to a page if at all possible. Now, don't panic, because if you have deep and complex experience, you're not going to get it on a page. And you can go up to 2 pages, but never more than that, because it just won't get read. Excuse me, we've had recruiters that have said, I just won't read a text-dense resume. So you want to try to save space where you can, and one way you can do that is that job title or that job information can be in one line if it's short enough. You optionally can include a line describing the company's business or your particular responsibilities to provide some context. I don't see that very often. because most of the time those things are conveyed in your bulleted accomplishment statements. But that is an option if you have, if you are in a job or have held a job that is a little hard to understand. So you can do that sort of overview short statement. Let's talk about bullets. These should be accomplishment statements, not responsibility statements. The difference between those are that we typically have learned to list a job and then what the responsibilities were. The issue with that is it reads like a job description, and that unfortunately does not distinguish you from anybody else who ever held that role. It just says what were the responsibilities. It doesn't say anything about how you did them. So you want to pivot your thinking about your bulleted statements to make them accomplishment statements, which means you're going to be including some details that demonstrate how well you do this work, not just that you did it. So for example, you'll see in these examples here, they include percentages. This just includes percentages, but some other details that you can include are dollar figures. Let's say you did something that generated revenue, and you have a close estimate to what that number is. If you could include generating 27,000 additional revenue, that's a good thing. Companies like to know that. Or if you've done something that resulted in cost savings of $8,000. Those kinds of things can be helpful, and you want to use the numerical form of numbers on your resume because it catches the eye, it saves space, it draws the recruiter's attention, and it's easier to skim. So, contrary to what we learned when we were going through grammar, that you spell out numbers below 10 in a resume, you may want to just be putting the numerical version. Like, for example, in your professional summary, you may say, with 7+ years of experience as a marketing director. So it's okay to use the number. So back to the bulleted statements, here's the framework that you want to be using for your bulleted statements. You want to start with an action verb. Worked for is not an action verb. Responsible for is not an action verb. You want to try to capture the most powerful action verb you can to demonstrate the skill. So you collaborated with, you designed, you developed, you directed, you managed, those kinds of things. On our website, on our resume section, we actually have a link to a document that is just a list of hundreds of action verbs. So if you're stuck and can't think of another word, that's a great resources to use. So you start with the action verb that catches the attention, and then you describe the thing, the task, and then you want to include as much of the supporting detail to demonstrate your accomplishments. And again, those details can be numbers like percentages, dollar figures, can be numbers of something like numbers of people you supervised, number of projects you completed, numbers of students you worked with. So all of those numbers are good. You can also provide examples. If you implemented, let's say you talk about technology in the classroom, you might, and of course this is escaping me now, but you might want to list a couple of examples of that type of technology, not just that you did technology, because if you have some concrete examples, that helps make, it verifies your experience for the recruiter. It helps make it tangible and and more credible because it's demonstrating some specific things. So it makes it more real for your reader. And then always, as much to the best of your ability, you want to include results in those accomplishment statements. What did you achieve? Because that, that's where the buck stops for employers, is what are you able to achieve? What's the impact? So results or outcome or impact. Now, obviously, if you're including like dollar figures or percentages, that's going to be part of your result statement. But let's say you're a teacher and you say something about implemented classroom management strategies. Well, if I'm the principal, that doesn't tell me anything. So, so you may want to include a couple of examples of the classroom management strategies that you included, and then the impact of that is creating a safe and conducive learning environment for all learners, or something like that. So it doesn't have to be a necessarily quantifiable kind of statement, but you're trying to address that impact or outcome as well. So does that make sense? I mean, I've spent a lot of time on this because this is really important. You want rich detail in your bulleted statements. And of course, the balancing act that you have to do is create, including rich detail without, writing a novel. So you want your bulleted statements to be 2 lines, keep them to 2 lines, and you have to be a little ruthless with yourself when you're writing them so that you can craft very succinct but powerful accomplishment statements. Verbs should be current for any positions you currently hold. Verbs should be past tense for anything you do not hold. So do not use current verbs for past positions. Don't use I did this in my current role, even though it's current role. You want it to be a present tense. Occasionally, you get into sort of a complicated situation, and there may be some exceptions. But generally, that's what you want to do with verbs, and you want to stay away from ing verbs. You want to stay away from, coordinating, developing. You want to be using develop, developed, collaborated, collaborate. But you want to use those kinds of verb forms. 2 lines per bullet, and we typically, good question, we recommend that you keep your accomplishment statements per position to in the 3 to 4 range. Generally, if you have it's a pretty deep experience, you can go up to 7, but research shows that you check out after more than that. So if you have a really long list of very important things that you did in your last role, the recruiter's not going to read them. Your guide needs to be the position description and what is relevant for that job. Remember, so one way to think about a resume when you're customizing it is the purpose of this resume is to get an interview for this job. So you may have done some things that was great work and you're very proud of, but they have nothing to do with the role you're applying for. You may choose to take that, a couple of those bullet points out for the, balancing the space issue so that it's more digestible and readable. You might take it out, a bullet point of a project that you did. If it has nothing to do with the job, you might take it out for that application, put it back in for the next one. Okay, so I want to go back to this experience piece. You'll see these are listed this way. Again, make sure you're writing accomplishment statements. Again, we do have a resource on our resume page that is a worksheet for writing accomplishment statements. So if you want more help with that, you can find that there. And please remind me at the end to jump to the Career and Professional Development website so we're sure that you know how to find those resources. Okay, I'm going to go on. Again, I talked about this additional experience. So this is one way also you can do things. So I want to talk a little bit about experience because there's something called a functional resume or a skills-based resume. And Melanie, maybe this is addressing your question, I'm not sure. But I will say before I talk about this at all, that there is a debate among recruiters about functional or skills-based resume. Some of them love them. There's a lot of them that don't. And so it's not used very typically. Most typical is a chronological based resume. We had a student recently let us know that they had done a functional resume and the recruiter said, I'm interested in you, but I don't use these resumes. Send me a chronological one. That's a little extreme maybe, but it can happen. So you want to be pretty cautious about using that, but we do have a template for that. That you could take a look at. But a skills-based resume is one where you really group your skills by category, talk about what you can do, and then underneath that you would put your employment history, and it would just be simply job title, employer, dates, and you don't put any bullet points underneath it. The other thing you can do is bundle roles. So if you were a, nurse manager in several different organizations and the roles were essentially the same, one way you can save space instead of just repeating, here's your job, here were your accomplishment statements, here's your job, here were your accomplishment statements, and the accomplishment statements are, generally the same. You could do one where you said nurse manager and list the organizations and the dates, and then do one set of bullets for all of those. So it's kind of a bundled representation of, the work that you've done rather than just having it look like a bunch of different jobs in a row. So yes, Melanie, I think that's, if I understand what you're saying there, that you collect your skills. If it's a similar kind of role, you can represent them under that kind of role, but you're just listing that the organization and the dates so that they see the employment history, but you're not repeating the same skills over and over again. You want to stay away from being repetitive. Okay, so I want to talk now about education here on this resume. You'll see that it's formatted the same way that your positions are. The job title is bolded here. Your degree should be first and bolded. They care more about your degree than if you did it at WGU or wherever. So you start with the title of your degree. If there's a specialization, like if you're a teacher and you are, you're like elementary education or secondary biology or something like that, you would include that there. And you list the month and year of your graduation. Do not put date ranges. That can get interpreted as studied there but didn't earn the degree. So you always want the completion date for your education. As you get farther and farther away from your education, your graduation, you may drop the month and just list the year. If you haven't graduated yet, you can list expected or anticipated. Use one of those two words, expected or anticipated, with the month and the year, and that lets them know that you are on, a plan to complete at a certain time. And then you list university name and city state. That should be included. Now, if you're an older person and you have previous degrees, you may not want to list the dates. One of the realities is it's illegal, but everybody admits that it happens. Age bias is a thing. So you want to be conscious of that as you make choices about including things on your resume. And that makes me want to go back to your experience. Generally, you want to be including 10 to 15 years of experience, probably not anything or much of anything before that. For two reasons. One, the age bias issue, but two, the world of work has changed so much that much of what you might have done 20 years ago may be not very relevant to what you're looking forward to and what employers are looking for. So you want to keep it in the 10 to 15 year range. Just be conscious of bias issues. Another bias issue might be religious or political affiliation. If you have worked as a youth minister, you may want to list youth minister, but not put the specific denomination. You might say faith community as the organization. If you've worked for a political organization, you may not want to name that it was for a particular representative or a particular, and just say political or community organization, something like that. So unless you're applying for a job for which that would be a benefit, so you maybe need to be making different choices depending on the jobs that you apply for. So Angelina, I'm not sure if you're applying for a government job or a federal job. They may, I guess I'm not actually sure about that. They may require you to list all jobs. Of course, some of that stuff's going to come up in background checks. We actually have had one instance that I can remember where an alum said that they didn't include everything on their resume, and the employer said, oh, there was all this other stuff that you did, it didn't come up in your background check, but it was completely irrelevant to the job. So that can happen, but typically that's not going to happen. So we'd have to do a little research to check out the federal job thing for sure. Shannon, your question about having 18 years of experience. I think if it's really relevant to what you're trying to do, it's okay to list it. It demonstrates pretty deep experience. You just need to be really looking at it from the perspective of, actually 18 years is not that, it's pretty close to 15, right? So you probably are okay with that. You just want to be conscientious about it when you're making decisions about what to list. All right. So I want to get back to this education piece and the rest of this walkthrough before I take any more questions, okay? So, excuse me, on your degree, I want to mention a couple things. One is placement, and then one is experience, your level of experience, and including some additional information. In many resumes, as in this example, the education is at the bottom. However, if you are a career starter or a career changer, you may want to think about the placement of your education, and you may want to move it up just below, say, your professional summary or professional profile. Because if you have a bunch of work experience, like what did I just had? I just had a resume where somebody was did something like you know, it was a retail experience. They did something really completely different, but they were applying for, I can't remember what it was now. But the first thing the recruiter sees is, you know, 7 years of experience as a meat cutter or something, you know, that that that's going in the reject pile, because that they are looking for, why are you qualified for my job? So if that's your experience, you may want to take your education, if it, you know, if your degree is related obviously to the job you're applying for, you may want to put that toward the top of your resume, so that's the first thing a recruiter sees when they start to read your resume. But again, this is about choices. There's not an exact science with resumes. You know, like sometimes people will say to me, should I do this or should I do this? And my answer is almost always going to be, it depends. It depends on the job description. It depends on how your qualifications relate to that. So, but that's a choice you can make. The placement of your education is a decision that you may want to make relative to, you know, the other things on your resume. Another point about education is, if you have no experience in the field that you're going into except for your degree, you can use some extra space. You may want to take off less relevant professional, you know, work experiences, and use some of your space on your resume for relevant coursework. You can list about, you know, somewhere in the territory of 3 to 5 courses that highlight specific skills or qualifications that you developed in your degree program for that position. This may change with every job you apply for because of what they're looking for. So you may choose 3 courses for one, and you may choose 2 different courses for a different job. It just depends. It depends. I've seen students do this different ways. You can just list the course titles. I've also seen people who've had the space on their resume just put separate bullet points for each course. And so it would be course title with a colon and then a brief description of the course. And you can get that language from the course objectives, the learning outcomes for the course. That's one way you can include more of those keywords that match the job description that algorithm is going to be looking for. So if you feel like I don't have any experience in this except for my degree, you may want to include some relevant coursework or your capstone project, which can help increase the number of keywords you have on your resume, which can help increase your score. Okay, and whoops, sorry, didn't mean to do that. I got a jumpy mouse today. Last thing is, I just want to reiterate this length thing. By the way, you should not list references on your resume or references available on request. Recruiters say, I'll ask for them when we're at that point, but you don't need to take that space on your resume. That's an outdated thing to include. And another outdated thing is objective statement. If you were around when we used to write objective statements, that's gone. Recruiters don't care. They know if you're applying for their job that you're interested in that kind of job. Use that space for your summary to highlight your qualifications. All right, another question. Do we list high school diploma? No. If you are in a college degree program, it's sufficient to list that with the expected or anticipated month year. If you're in college, they know that you've gotten some kind of high school credential. Technology versus personal attributes seems to be a big change over the last 20 years. Yes, and if you mean by personal attributes, I would say durable skills are also very important, like the soft skills, because one of the things actually we keep hearing, even in the tech industry, I mean, I heard some tech alum doing a panel last fall for some of our students, how to get your first job. And they ranged from, you know, first job from WGU and, or 3-4 jobs up, and people are senior managers at like Microsoft. So there's a range of about 5 alum. And they all said technical skills are great, but you also really need strong communication, problem solving, teamwork, work ethic kinds of skills, because employers continue to say, yes, we need the technical skills, and we also need these kinds of things. So I'm not sure if that's what you meant by personal attributes, but that's kind of the direction that's going. All right. Would it be placement of importance or priority in an order? Focus maybe on last on multiple jobs and education first listed. I don't quite understand what you're asking there.
I'm sorry, may I comment?
Yep, sure.
My question about that, what I mean is that if I've held so many jobs, I don't want to put that at the top of my resume. I don't want to draw attention to that. But if my education is impressive. I want to put that at the top versus the collective experience that may appear to be as a job jumper at the bottom. I mean, in the order of priority is that's kind of what I was asking, and I think you talked about that when you
Yes,
talked about the education in the order in the placement on the resume.
yes, uh,
Yes,
that's
thank you.
correct. You want the most, think about it this way, you want your most relevant qualifications at the top of your resume so that they see that first. The other stuff is great history, um, but if they don't see your most relevant qualifications, and this is why the two-page resume can be problematic. Sometimes people put their degree at the bottom of their resume and it's on the second page and it's their most important qualification. If a recruiter starts to read a resume and they don't, they see that you've been working at Starbucks and, whatever, they may never turn the page. So that's why just think, you want to push up everything that's the most important to be at the top. Certifications, no. Certifications should be listed that are related to the role. If you have a certification that has nothing to do with the role, leave it off. If you're, so I'm going to say this, like if you have a CPR, if you're certified for CPR and you're a teacher, that's probably a good thing. However, the Teachers College template and requirements say that the certifications you list on your official resume that you submit should be teaching related. So, that may be something that you don't use for your school process, but as you're applying for jobs, you may want to add back in the CPR certification. Hope that makes sense. So how far back should we list job history? 10 to 15 years. That's really where you want to cap that. I mean, there are some exceptions if somebody's had a role that's really significantly applicable to the job they're applying for. It was prior to that, 15 years. That's when I'd use that relevant professional experience designation, and then additional or other experience as a separate section. The one-page resume, it's just becoming an industry standard, like us, particularly in tech. That's what we're hearing from employers. They don't want to read more than that. And again, it's this issue about recruiters are moving pretty quickly. If you, again, have deep and relevant and complex experience, it's okay to spill over, but they are not going to take the time to read a 4-page resume or a 3-page resume. They just won't do it. They've told us, I'm not interested in digging through all of this text to find out if this person is qualified for my job. Because the thing is, your resume is no longer a document that says, here's the whole me, the whole professional me, all of my wonderful work and wonderful qualifications, which you're very proud of and you should be. But think about this from the recruiter's perspective. Their job is to find the person who can do the job they're trying to hire for. So think about it like a story. Your resume is your story about who you are and what you can bring to the table for this employer. And we've all had those experiences where we're listening to somebody tell us, and they just go on this like left field tangent and they're going down a rabbit hole and they're talking about something, and we listen politely for a minute or two and then just say like you lost me, where are you, why are we talking about this? They lost the thread of the story and distracted your attention to the through line of the story. You want to make sure your resume has a through line for that job and doesn't have a bunch of extra details that distract the recruiter from seeing why you're qualified for the role. That's why you want to be pretty tough with yourself, about asking the question, does this really apply to my qualifications for this job? If it doesn't, it probably doesn't belong on my resume. Okay? Again, it's a judgment call. You're trying to balance space and representation. It's just something that you have to just keep doing, and you get better and better at as you do it. All right, I'm going to move on to make sure we get to some of our other tips here. Just a little bit of review. I've talked about some of these, but just to reiterate, you want classic sans serif font. That's what this looks like here. You want to limit to 1 page. If you have really deep experience, if you've had director or manager level roles, you're probably going to have more than 1 page. But again, you want to make sure that you don't go beyond 2. You want to be really consistent in your formatting down to when you use periods. Don't put periods at the end of some bullets and not at the end of others. At that kind of attention to detail is important in a lot of roles in today's workplace. So you want to make sure your section headings all look the same, that your bullets all look the same, that you use periods in the same place, that the spacing between your lines is the same. Sometimes I see resumes where people will have like single space and then they'll have like, 1.34 between lines or something like that. So you can see that visually when you look at the page, the spacing's not the same. So be critical on your, hard on yourself about that and make sure it's really consistent all the way through. The intentionality about your content goes back to matching, what you're putting on this resume that you're applying for that job description. You're matching the language and your qualifications to that job description and taking out things that will distract the recruiter from seeing why you're qualified for the job. That's the customization piece too. So the key here is using that job posting for your guide, and we're going to look at one in a minute, but that's where you want to keep going back to. Should I include this? Let's look at the job description. Should I take this out? Let's look at the job description. That's where we're going to go all the time. Okay, here's some don'ts. There's a thing that's been going around for a number of years, but like, hey, you can cheat the applicant tracking system by copying the entire job description and putting it in white text at the end of your resume. Don't do it. It's a really bad idea. One is, hardly anybody's ever going to score 100%. And if you score 100%, a recruiter is going to wonder why, and they're going to start to take a look at it. And if you don't have, 3 or 4 of the qualifications, they know that you did this. There are companies that will blacklist you for the role if you do that. There are companies that will blacklist you permanently for any role if they discover that you do this. And why? Because you just told them you're willing to cheat. So don't do that. Stay away from that. Don't need to list references. Again, all of that formatting, other stuff, colors. You don't want to put stuff in the headers or the footers of the document. You don't want columns in there. All of those things can, cause your resume to get garbled or misread or just rejected from an applicant tracking system. No personal pronouns. We don't use I, me, my, we, or any of those kinds of pronouns on a resume. You want it to be third person voice. And then don't go smaller than 10. You can play with your margins if you're getting tight on space. You can go down to 1/2 inch, but I would not go smaller margins than that because then you just got a crammed page and it's hard for a recruiter to read. I want to jump to this job description. And sorry, I've got a couple questions here I want to take. So is it common for a career changer applying for an internship? Probably not very common. Typically, internships are designed for people coming, in school and getting practice. There are some ways to gain experience outside of internships, though, and that's less common, but it is possible to get some hands-on experience for things. And I'm not quite sure, same person, I'm not quite sure what your question is, but what you would suggest for that kind of resume if you are trying to apply for an internship. I mean, you can, I wouldn't do anything particularly different. If you're applying for an internship, you want to demonstrate what qualifications you already have. It depends on what the internship requirements are. So you want to just be going back to that, looking at the requirements and making sure you're including anything that demonstrates that you've already gotten to the level that they're looking for their internship candidates. Hope that helps a little bit. All right, we're going to look at this job description here, and typically job descriptions are often divided into like a responsibilities and a skills and requirements section. So what you want to do is you want to go through this and look for what are the keywords that you believe that they're looking for. So read the sentence carefully and figure out what is it that they're actually looking for. So if you look at this, this is an introduction. Our culture is agile and open. It's a distributed team. We put a heavy emphasis on clear communication, collaboration, and iteration. So distributed, they're spread apart. They may be remote, I don't know. But what they're looking for is strong communication. You want evidence of strong communication. So you want to make sure that your resume is really well written. Obviously, how much can you highlight your experience in collaboration? That's important. It's important to use the word collaboration. You may have written a resume that talks about, being a great team player. Well, the ATS is not going to recognize that collaboration and teamwork are the same thing. Maybe someday AI will get that smart, but right now it's not. So use the word collaboration. and iteration. So if you, now obviously I'm not recommending that you make up things in your history to be able to use these words, but if you can apply this language to your experience, you want to, that's what I mean by mirroring the language from the position description. All right, so if you look down here, these are all things, this one of my colleagues went through and put the keywords in red. So community development, do you have any experience in community development? Is there a way that you can talk about that based on your experience? What kind of customer service experience do you have? Again, service is here. So you go through and you highlight these things that seem to be important words. I might add adapt if you have something that you could include. I mean, that's a skill that if you have adapt, you may something that you could talk about having adapted would be helpful. So you go through and you identify these things that seem to be the most important skills and experiences they're looking for in this particular example. They're looking for somebody that has Agile and Scrum experience. It would be absolutely critical to put those skills in your resume. But don't make it up if you don't have it. That's not what I'm saying. And then go back through and see what's repeated, because those are the big hitters. So we've got communication at least a couple times. We've got collaboration. We've got customer service 3 times. So those are bolded. Anything that's repeated is bolded. So you absolutely want to make sure that you've addressed those in some of your bullet points. Okay. So again, this job description is key. And so, you know, one of the things this is just an aside, that whenever you're applying for a role, you want to make sure you take a copy of the position description and keep a copy of the resume that you use to apply for that position. Just make a folder for that job title and company and keep that, because if you get to the point where you've gone through the process and they do contact you for an interview, it's very likely that that posting will have been taken down, and so the position description is no longer, you know, available. And I've talked to some people who said, I don't know, I was just applying for so many jobs, I didn't do that. But then if you get into an interview situation, you're trying to remember the job description from memory, and that's awfully tough. So be sure you make a copy, and then you can, you know, work with it like this. All right, I've got a question. Shannon, would an ATS pick up the word collaborated used in a job accomplished on a resume to be in line with collaboration on the job description? Great and timely question, because I'm going to give you a couple tools here. You can just grab those titles, excuse me, those URLs, and look them up. SkillSyncer and JobScan are both resume customization tools. They both have other tools on there, but I recommend that you look these up and bookmark them. What you do is you upload your resume and you upload the position description, and it will do an analysis of your document and give you a score that approximates what you may get in an ATS. Now, remember, ATSs are all different, so they're programmed differently. So it's not a guarantee by any means, but it's going to give you a pretty good idea. And what will happen is they'll get a score, and then it will give you the specifics about what you matched and what you didn't match. So SkillSyncer is unlimited and free, and I think it's pretty good. I would start with that. JobScan is a subscription-based service, so they're eventually going to want you to pay, but I think you get 5 free scans before they ask you to do that. So you might want to save that one for I've done it all and I want just one more run through, for this job I really want. But to get back to your question, some applicant tracking systems are very literal. So for example, so one thing I'm going to say is, please do not be shocked at how low your score is the first time you do this. That does not mean you are not qualified for the job. I uploaded a resume and a position description for a candidate who was very qualified for a role, and I don't remember what it was now, but the score was under 50. But then I looked at the explanation, and it was things like one of the documents had the word analyze, and the other document had the word analysis, and it came up as not a match. So some of them are smart enough to figure that out. Some of them are not. So anytime you can do the work to try to match as exactly as possible, the higher likelihood that you're going to get a higher score. But this lack of customization of your resume when you are applying for a job is the #1 reason that qualified candidates do not get called for an interview. It's because they have more general information or the language that they used was different. It's not that they aren't qualified for the job. So this piece of work is critically important when you're applying for jobs. All right. So these tools can really help you. Practice that. I think after you do several of them, you'll get the idea. It's always a good, it's always good to use these tools to check those things, but you'll get a pretty good idea after doing a handful of them about, what you need to be paying attention to, and you'll get faster at it. So hope that answers the question. So I just want to jump now back to other questions. These are sample questions. I'm going to scan back through the chat. I think I got them, but in case I missed some, if I missed yours, please put it in again. And feel free to put additional questions in. These are great questions, all of you. Thank you for them. I think we got them. Okay, I'm going to jump to our career and professional development website because I did say I want to show you that. Here we go. I'm going to stick this in the chat. So please grab this URL, and if you haven't been here, bookmark this. This is your new best friend. So this is our career and professional development website. There's a lot of stuff here. There's some quick links down here. Handshake, if you're trying to get into Handshake quickly. And sort of a general overview of our resource library. So there's a couple ways and resources by college. So you can get to those on the front page. You can also go up here to this top menu. I know that's probably pretty tiny for you, but you see there's career tools. The employers is for employers that we work with, job search, career events. So you may want to be looking at the career tools and career events particularly. Under the career tools, you'll see this resource library and resources by college. And there's also professional development things. So I'd recommend that you peruse this and spend some time getting familiar with this. But I do want to point you to this resource library. There's kind of two main sections that work for most people. If you are interested in diversity resources, we also have some there, and if you're a vet, we've got military resources. So I just want to point that out. But the two core sections that you want to be working with is planning your career, and I just want to show you the kind of stuff that's in here. If you don't know what direction you want to go, there's overviews for career identity, and for example, like here in this overview in the career exploration, there are things that you can download, like these career guides can help you look for different kinds of roles. And those are by degree. I think those are split up by degree. So if you haven't seen this yet, sorry, that jumped me to a different place. I did not mean to go there, excuse me. But like here with career identity, if you're a career starter, changer, or advancer, there's some resources here. Like the career exploration guide is something that, boy, they just redid our website and it just got really, oh, here, this is what I'm looking for. This career exploration guide. And I will say there's a lot of stuff here, so I hope you don't get overwhelmed. We have a lot of these kinds of guides sprinkled throughout our website for different kinds of things. Like there's a networking one, there's a gaining experience one. But if you're trying to figure out what to do, this is a great place to start. These kinds of guides give you a structured approach to go step by step, and it's got links to a ton of different things. So look for those kinds of things. But there's self-assessments, there's ways you can do industry and occupational research. If you're going to grad school, there's some information there. Here's an action plan, a career action. Here's a career planning guide. There's another one of those guides. So those are great. But I do want to really point you, I'm going to jump back to this resource library to the Get the Job. So I can specifically show you, see there's all this stuff in here, cover letters, interviewing, salary, networking, all that stuff, great stuff. But in our resume section, which is what we're talking about today, there's so many good things to talk about in career. One of the things I would recommend as a next step for you is go here to this Complete Our Resume course. This is a click-through tutorial, and it can take you 20 minutes, an hour, whatever, but have your resume ready, go through the course. It reiterates and reinforces some of the things I've been talking about today and gives you some other specific examples. At the end of that course, there's a link for additional support. And if you complete the course and you click on that link, it'll give you instructions to request a written resume review from one of our career advisors. Great, Gregory, you've already taken the course. You're here to reinforce that. You can do it either way, that's great. But if you haven't done the course, please do that. But look here, this is the stuff I was talking about. We have these things on our website under the Apply Your Learning. These supplemental resources, there's a document for building a strong professional profile. Here's the resume action verbs that I talked about. And then also the accomplishment statement when you're writing your bulleted statements to get, you know, that some samples about how do you include numbers and examples and impact outcome. That accomplishment statement worksheet is great. And here's another one to, you know, prompt yourself. If you're stuck, I don't know how to create accomplishment statements, look at this questions to ask to create awesome accomplishments that might help prompt your thinking out of the sort of responsibility mentality. All right, so I just wanted to make sure you saw that and were aware of that. Please, again, bookmark that page. Our main career and professional development site, because this can be a hugely useful tool for you if you haven't done this. All right, any last questions? All right, again, I'm going to stick our email address in the chat. You want to grab that, and you know, feel free to email our team if you have additional questions. I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you so much for coming, and we'll hope to see you in and around career and professional development when you need assistance. Thank you. Take care.